Have you ever felt someone's presence without a single word being spoken? No message, no call, no confession, and yet somehow you can feel them hovering in your energy, watching, lingering, almost reaching, but never quite crossing the line. That's the strange paradox. When an avoidant secretly misses you, they won't say it, they won't admit it, they might not even admit it to themselves, but their silence starts speaking in ways that are louder than words. And if you don't know how to read those signals, you'll mistake distance for indifference, when sometimes it's actually fear wrapped around longing. Today, we're breaking down the 3 silent signals avoidants send when they secretly miss you. And the first one is so subtle, most people miss it completely. The first silent signal is what I call digital proximity without emotional risk. They won't text you, they won't open the door to a real conversation, but somehow they're always there. They view your stories within minutes. They react to a post you made 3 days ago. They like something random at 1:47 in the morning, no message attached, no explanation, just a quiet digital footprint that says, I'm here. Avoidants crave connection, but only at a distance that feels safe. When they miss you, they don't rush toward you. They orbit you. Watching your updates gives them a controlled dose of closeness. They can see your face, hear your voice, track your life, without risking rejection, vulnerability, or emotional exposure. And late at night, when the world is quiet and their defenses are lower, that's when you'll notice it most. The view, the subtle reaction, the lingering presence. It's not accidental, it's not random scrolling, it's longing filtered through fear. They want to feel connected to you without having to admit they still care. Because admitting they miss you would mean confronting emotions they've trained themselves to suppress. So instead of saying, I miss you, they silently consume your world from a distance. And the truth is, people don't repeatedly check on what they're emotionally detached from. The second silent signal is the low-effort check-in that feels almost confusing. Out of nowhere, you get a simple message, hope you're doing well, just checking in, saw something that reminded me of you. It's brief, it's neutral, it lacks depth, and that's exactly the point. When an avoidant misses you, they don't come back with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. They test the water with the smallest emotional investment possible. They send a message that can easily be brushed off as casual, so if you respond coldly, they can retreat without feeling exposed. But if you respond warmly, they feel a small wave of relief. That tiny message took more courage than you realize. Because for someone who fears emotional dependency, even reaching out feels like giving up control. They rehearse it, they overthink it, they type and delete it 3 times. And when they finally press send, their heart rate is higher than you'd expect for something so simple. That hope you're good is often code for, I've been thinking about you and I don't know what to do with that feeling. But they can't say that part out loud. Vulnerability feels like stepping onto thin ice, so they disguise longing as politeness, they disguise missing you as friendliness. And if you look closely, you'll notice the timing. These check-ins often happen when they sense you pulling away, when your energy feels less available, or when they realize life is moving forward without them in it. Missing you becomes undeniable when the possibility of losing you feels real. The third silent signal is nostalgia slipping into conversation, like it just came to mind. They'll casually mention a memory. Remember that place we went to? I heard that song the other day. That food spot you liked popped up on my feed. It sounds harmless, random, but it's rarely random. Avoidants don't live in the past publicly. They don't openly dwell on emotional memories. So when they bring up something specific you shared, it means that memory has been replaying privately in their mind. Nostalgia is a safer way to express attachment. It allows them to revisit closeness without admitting they want it back. When they miss you, their mind goes to shared moments because those moments felt safe before things got complicated. They won't say, I miss how we were, but they'll say, that was a good day. And they'll say it with a softness you might not expect. That softness is the crack in the armor, and sometimes, right after sharing a memory, they'll quickly change the subject. That shift tells you everything. They felt something rise in their chest, something too vulnerable to sit with for long. So they redirect. But the fact that they brought it up at all, that's the signal. You don't reminisce about someone you've emotionally erased. And here's what makes all of this so emotionally complicated. When avoidants miss you, they are often fighting themselves at the same time. One part of them wants to reach for you. Another part warns them that reaching means losing independence, losing control, risking rejection, or reopening wounds they never properly healed, so their longing comes out sideways, through story views, through polite check-ins, through nostalgic breadcrumbs. And if you're on the receiving end, it can make you question your reality. If they miss me, why don't they just say it? Because for someone wired to associate closeness with vulnerability or overwhelm, saying I miss you feels like handing over power. It feels like stepping into emotional exposure without armor. So they send signals instead. Quiet ones, subtle ones, signals that allow them to maintain dignity if you don't respond the way they hope. But here's the deeper truth I want you to hold on to. Silent signals are not the same as emotional readiness. Just because they miss you doesn't automatically mean they're prepared to love you in the way you deserve. Missing someone is about feeling. Showing up consistently is about emotional maturity. And sometimes the hardest part is accepting that someone can long for you deeply and still not be ready to meet you openly. If you've been sensing these signs, you're not imagining them. Energy doesn't lie, patterns don't lie, repeated behavior doesn't lie. But your worth should never depend on decoding breadcrumbs. You deserve clarity. You deserve someone who doesn't just watch your life from the sidelines, but steps into it fully. And if an avoidant is missing you in silence right now, understand this. Their quiet longing says more about their internal battle than it does about your value. The question isn't whether they miss you, the question is whether they're brave enough to let missing you turn into real action. The question isn't whether they miss you. The question is whether they're brave enough to let missing you turn into real action. And this is where the fourth silent signal begins to show itself in a way that feels almost confusing, because suddenly the tone shifts. Not dramatically, not in a way they would ever admit, but subtly. If you pay attention, you'll notice it. The cold, detached responses soften. The dry one-word replies slowly become full sentences. There's a warmth that wasn't there before. Maybe they respond faster than usual. Maybe they add an extra sentence when they didn't have to. Maybe there's a softness in their energy that feels unfamiliar compared to the emotional distance you grew used to. This cold, warm switch is rarely random. Avoidants don't become softer for no reason. When they secretly miss you, their defenses weaken just enough for their real feelings to leak through. They don't suddenly become emotionally expressive, but they become slightly more available, slightly more present, slightly more engaged. And if you're emotionally attached, that slight shift can feel like everything. It feels like hope. It feels like the version of them you always knew was inside. But here's the emotional complexity. That warmth often comes in waves. One day, they feel close. The next day, they pull back again. It's not because they're playing a game. It's because closeness triggers their fear just as much as distance triggers their longing. When they feel you slipping away, they soften. When they feel themselves getting too close, they retreat. And if you've been caught in that cycle, you know how emotionally exhausting it can be. You start questioning yourself. Was that warmth real? Did you imagine it? But you didn't imagine it. It was real. It just wasn't stable. And stability requires emotional safety they may not have built yet. The fifth silent signal is something most people misinterpret completely. It's distance that feels heavier than usual, not the normal detached silence you're used to, but a deeper quiet, a complete withdrawal that seems almost intentional. When avoidants miss you intensely, sometimes they don't move closer, they disappear further, because missing you brings emotions to the surface that feel overwhelming. Longing feels like vulnerability. Vulnerability feels unsafe. So instead of reaching out, they shut down. They convince themselves they don't need anyone. They distract themselves. They bury the feeling under work, hobbies, new faces, anything that helps them avoid sitting with the ache. But here's the part that hurts to accept. Distance doesn't always mean they've stopped caring. Sometimes it means they're feeling too much. The silence becomes a coping mechanism. If they don't engage, they don't have to confront what they feel. And when you're on the receiving end of that silence, it can feel like abandonment. It can trigger your own fears. You might tell yourself, if they cared, they wouldn't disappear. And from a healthy attachment perspective, that's true. But avoidants operate differently. Their instinct when overwhelmed by emotion isn't to lean in, it's to retreat until they feel regulated again. That doesn't justify the pain it causes you, but it explains the pattern. Their silence is often self-protection, not indifference, and that distinction matters even if it doesn't make it easier. The sixth silent signal shows up when your energy changes, when you finally stop chasing, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop reaching out first. The moment your attachment loosens, something shifts inside them. Because avoidants often don't feel the full weight of missing you until the connection feels like it's truly slipping away. As long as you're there, as long as you're available, their nervous system feels safe, maintaining distance. But when you detach, even slightly, it creates space. And in that space, reality hits. You're not guaranteed. You're not waiting forever. You're not orbiting around them anymore. And suddenly, they lean in. They text more. They initiate. They ask how you are with genuine curiosity. They might even suggest seeing you. This energy shift isn't manipulation in most cases. It's awakening. Loss clarifies feelings that comfort keeps hidden. When you were always there, they didn't have to confront how much you mattered. When you step back, they feel the absence. And absence has a way of amplifying suppressed attachment. But this is also where you have to be careful, because sometimes the increase in effort is temporary. It's a reaction to fear of losing you, not necessarily a sign of long-term emotional readiness. The question becomes, are they moving toward you because they miss you or because they don't want to feel abandoned? Those are two very different motivations, and your heart deserves the first one. The seventh silent signal is jealousy that doesn't look like jealousy. Avoidants rarely admit insecurity openly. They won't say, "I don't like the thought of you with someone else." Instead, it slips out sideways. A subtle comment about someone in your picture, a change in tone when you mention going out, a question that sounds casual but feels loaded. Who were you with? You seem busy lately. It might even show up as irritation. Shorter responses, a little edge in their words, and you're left wondering what shifted. When they secretly miss you, the idea of you emotionally investing elsewhere activates something primal inside them. Attachment doesn't disappear just because they suppressed it. And when they sense competition or replacement, it forces them to confront feelings they tried to downplay. But instead of saying, "I'm afraid of losing you," they might act distant or slightly defensive. Because admitting jealousy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like surrender. So they mask it, yet the emotional charge is there. If they truly didn't care, your social life wouldn't affect them at all. The reaction, even if subtle, tells you attachment still exists beneath the surface. The eighth silent signal is small but powerful. Emotional slips. Moments where the mask falls for just a second. Maybe they say, "I've been thinking," and pause longer than usual. Maybe their voice sounds softer on a call. Maybe they almost say something meaningful and then quickly change the subject. These micro vulnerabilities are rare, and that's what makes them important. Avoidants don't easily let their guard down. So when they do, even briefly, it means the emotion pushed past their defenses before they could fully contain it. You might notice it in their eyes if you see them in person, a lingering look, a softness that contradicts their usual composure. And then, just as quickly, the walls go back up. They redirect the conversation, they joke, they detach. But that moment was real, and if you felt it, trust that. Here's what I want you to understand as we reach this point. Someone can miss you deeply and still not know how to hold you safely. Someone can long for your presence and still sabotage the connection because closeness activates fears they never healed. That doesn't make you unlovable. It doesn't make you too much. It simply means their capacity doesn't match their feelings yet. And that's the hardest truth to sit with. Because when you feel the signals, when you see the views, the check-ins, the nostalgia, the softness, the jealousy, the slips, it creates hope, and hope can anchor you to potential instead of reality. So while you're learning to read these silent signals, don't lose yourself trying to decode someone who refuses to speak clearly. If they miss you, let them prove it with consistency. Let them bridge the gap between longing and action. Because you deserve more than secret feelings hidden behind fear. You deserve someone who doesn't just miss you in silence, but chooses you out loud. You deserve someone who doesn't just miss you in silence, but chooses you out loud. And yet, if you've loved someone avoidant, you know how powerful those silent currents can feel, because even when they don't speak, something underneath keeps moving. And the ninth silent signal begins right here, in what feels like unfinished business. When avoidants secretly miss you, they often circle back to conversations that were never fully resolved. Out of nowhere, they bring up something from the past, an old disagreement, a misunderstanding, a moment that ended abruptly. And they frame it casually. I've been thinking about what happened. I don't think I explained myself well. Maybe I overreacted. It sounds logical on the surface, almost analytical, but underneath that logic is emotion that never fully settled. Avoidants don't like loose emotional threads. When they miss you, those threads start pulling at them. Regret creeps in, reflection creeps in. They replay moments in their mind where they distanced themselves too quickly or responded too coldly. And instead of saying, I miss us, they revisit the last emotional crack in the foundation. Because reopening a past conversation feels safer than openly expressing longing. It gives them structure. It gives them something concrete to focus on, instead of admitting vulnerability. And if they're bringing up the past, it's usually because you're still living in their present. The tense silent signal is intensity, where it doesn't quite match the situation. An overreaction to something small, a stronger emotional response than expected. Maybe you cancel plans and they seem unusually affected. Maybe you don't respond quickly and their tone shifts. Maybe you mention moving forward and there's a flash of something sharp in their energy. Avoidants don't typically show big emotions easily, so when they do, especially in moments that seem minor, it's often because there's something deeper underneath. When they secretly miss you, their nervous system is already activated. The connection feels fragile, so small triggers feel bigger. It's not always expressed as softness. Sometimes it shows up as irritation, sometimes as withdrawal, sometimes as defensiveness. But the intensity is the clue. If they truly felt nothing, their reactions would be flat. Indifference is quiet. Attachment is charged. And when someone who usually appears detached suddenly shows emotional spikes, it means there's more going on internally than they're willing to articulate. The key is recognizing the difference between someone reacting because they care and someone reacting because they want control. Missing you creates vulnerability, and vulnerability often leaks out in unpolished ways. The 11th silent signal appears when they start investing again, but subtly. The conversations get longer. They ask deeper questions. Not overly emotional, not dramatically romantic, but slightly more personal than before. How have you really been? Are you happy? What's been on your mind lately? These aren't surface level check-ins anymore. They're probing gently beneath the surface. Avoidants don't move fast emotionally, so when they begin reinvesting, it happens gradually. A little more time, a little more curiosity, a little more presence. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice the effort increasing in small but meaningful ways. They might remember details you shared weeks ago. They might follow up on something important to you. These gestures may seem basic compared to what you wish they'd do, but for someone avoidant, consistent engagement requires internal work. It means they're pushing against their instinct to detach. When they miss you, they start testing the possibility of rebuilding connection, not with dramatic declarations, but with steady re-entry. The danger here is interpreting subtle reinvestment as full emotional transformation. It's progress, yes, but progress still needs consistency. And consistency is what turns longing into something real. The 12th silent signal shows up during what I call the regret window. There is often a specific period when avoidants feel the weight of missing you most intensely, and it usually happens after they realize you're no longer emotionally waiting. When you stop reaching out, when your tone becomes neutral, when your energy shifts from hopeful to grounded, that's when the regret begins to surface. Because now the safety net is gone. The assumption that you'll always be there starts to crumble. And in that space, clarity appears. They replay your kindness, your patience, the moments you tried. They start noticing what they lost instead of what they feared. And sometimes during this window, they re-emerge more openly than before. Not fully vulnerable, not fully transformed, but more honest than they were when they felt in control. The regret window can be powerful. It can create emotional conversations that feel like breakthroughs. But here's the part that requires strength on your end. Regret doesn't automatically equal readiness. Someone can feel sorry. Someone can miss you deeply. But unless they've confronted the root of their avoidance, the cycle can repeat. And you deserve to protect your heart from becoming the lesson someone learns too late. And now we arrive at the 13th silent signal, the quiet truth that sits beneath all the others. Internal conflict. When avoidants secretly miss you, they experience a push and pull inside themselves that most people never see. One side longs for connection, warmth, familiarity. The other side whispers warnings about dependency, engulfment, rejection. They may think about texting you and talk themselves out of it. They may type out a message and delete it. They may imagine seeing you and then convince themselves it's better to stay distant. This inner battle is exhausting. And sometimes instead of choosing connection or fully letting go, they stay suspended in between, watching, thinking, missing, but not acting decisively. That suspension can leave you in limbo too if you allow it. So here's what I want you to feel deeply as we close this part of the journey. Yes, avoidance sends silent signals when they miss you. Yes, the views, the check-ins, the nostalgia, the jealousy, the reinvestment, the regret, they all mean something. Your intuition isn't crazy. You're not imagining the shifts. But someone missing you in silence is only half the story. The other half is courage. The other half is growth. The other half is whether they're willing to face the fear that makes them hide their feelings in the first place. You cannot build a secure connection on unspoken longing alone. You cannot sustain love on breadcrumbs and emotional hints. And while it's validating to know they miss you, your worth was never dependent on that confirmation. If they truly miss you, they will eventually have to choose between their fear and their feelings. And if they choose fear, that's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity. Let their silence teach you clarity instead of confusion. Let their signals inform you but not trap you. And most importantly, let yourself be chosen loudly, consistently, and without hesitation, because love was never meant to be decoded like a mystery. It was meant to be felt, expressed, and held without fear. Love was never meant to be decoded like a mystery. It was meant to be felt, expressed, and held without fear. And yet, when you've been connected to someone avoidant, it can start to feel exactly like that, a puzzle you're constantly trying to solve. So let's go deeper. Because the 14th silent signal appears in a way that's almost invisible unless you're paying very close attention. It's comparison, not the loud kind, not the obvious kind, but subtle comparisons that slip into conversation without warning. They mention dating someone new, but it doesn't feel enthusiastic. There's a flatness in their tone. Or they casually reference how people are complicated, or how it's hard to find something real. And sometimes, almost unconsciously, they bring up qualities you had. You were always good at understanding me. You were patient. You handled things differently. It may not sound romantic, it may not sound like longing, but it is. Because when someone misses you, their brain naturally compares new experiences to the emotional blueprint you left behind. And if they're still thinking about how you measured up, it means you still exist as a reference point in their emotional world. Avoidance rarely prays directly after distance. That feels too exposed, so they disguise it as observation. But make no mistake, comparison is attachment, trying to make sense of loss. The 15th silent signal is something that often happens in shared spaces, whether that's online, in mutual environments, or through social circles. They find ways to subtly remain visible, not overly obvious, not intrusive, just present enough to remind you they're still there. Maybe they suddenly engage more in group conversations when you're active. Maybe they position themselves nearby at events. Maybe they become more noticeable when they sense your attention shifting elsewhere. This isn't always conscious. But when someone misses you, their instinct is to stay within your peripheral vision. Avoidants don't usually chase loudly, they hover strategically. Presence becomes their way of saying, "Don't forget me." And if you felt that strange awareness, like they're around you but not fully stepping forward, that's not accidental energy. It's cautious attachment. It's someone who doesn't want to disappear from your world, but also doesn't know how to re-enter it openly. And that in-between space can feel magnetic. It keeps the connection alive without resolving it. But remember this, visibility is not vulnerability. Being around you is not the same as emotionally showing up for you. The 16th silent signal shows up in their self-improvement narrative. Suddenly they talk about growth, about understanding themselves better, about working on independence, emotional awareness, communication. They may mention reflecting on patterns. They may hint that they've realized certain mistakes, and while this can be genuine, and sometimes it truly is, it also often surfaces when missing you has forced them into introspection. Loss has a way of cracking open self-awareness. When you're no longer constantly validating their distance or accommodating their fears, they're left alone with their own patterns. And that solitude can be confronting. So when they start speaking about growth, pay attention to the timing. Did it begin after you stepped back? After you stopped overfunctioning in the connection? Missing you can become the catalyst for transformation. But transformation isn't proven through words, it's proven through consistent change over time. Anyone can talk about growth when loneliness hits. Real growth shows up in behavior, especially when vulnerability is required. So if they speak about healing while still avoiding emotional responsibility, the narrative doesn't match the action, and you deserve alignment, not potential. The 17th silent signal is emotional echoing. This one is subtle but powerful. They start using phrases you used, adopting perspectives you once shared, referencing lessons you tried to teach them. It's as if your voice lingers in their internal dialogue. And in many ways it does. When someone misses you, they don't just miss your presence, they miss the emotional impact you had on their life. They miss how you challenged them, supported them, reflected parts of themselves back to them. Avoidance may resist influence while you're close, because closeness feels overwhelming. But after distance sets in, your impact becomes clearer. They may start embodying pieces of what you brought into their world. And that's not coincidence, it's integration. It's the quiet acknowledgement that you mattered. But here's the bittersweet truth. Sometimes people grow from losing you, not while holding you. And while it's validating to know you left a mark, it doesn't mean you're obligated to return just because they finally see your value. Growth inspired by your absence doesn't automatically guarantee they can sustain connection in your presence. And now we arrive at the 18th silent signal, the one that ties everything together. Stillness, not silence, not avoidance, but a kind of emotional stillness that feels reflective rather than detached. When avoidants truly miss you on a deeper level, not just ego, not just comfort, not just familiarity, there comes a phase where they sit with it. They stop distracting. They stop reacting impulsively. They stop playing it cool. And internally, they begin confronting the truth of what they feel. You might not see this process immediately. It happens quietly. But sometimes you'll sense it when they approach you differently. Calmer, less defensive, more grounded. This is the stage where missing you becomes undeniable to them. Not as panic, not as jealousy, but as clarity. And clarity is powerful, because clarity forces a choice. They either move toward you with intention, or they accept that fear will continue to cost them meaningful connection. And here's where I want to speak directly to you. If you've been watching the signs, analyzing the signals, trying to decode the subtle shifts, pause, breathe. Yes, avoidance sends silent signals when they secretly miss you. Yes, their behavior can reveal longing even when their words don't. But your life cannot revolve around interpreting someone else's internal conflict. You are not meant to be a detective in your own love story. You are meant to be chosen in clarity, loved in consistency, held without hesitation. If someone misses you but refuses to rise above their fear, that is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their limitations. And while it's human to hope they'll step forward, it's powerful to know you don't have to wait for them to do so in order to move forward yourself. The most important signal in this entire journey isn't the one they send, it's the one you send to yourself. The signal that says, I deserve love, that isn't silent. And the moment you fully believe that, everything changes.